Today I want to talk about ethnobotany, and this is going to be the second part of this two-part series. So the first video was on horticulture, and this is going to be on ethnobotany. So horticulture can be thought of as how we grow plants, so it's the science and application of botany, and then it's also utilizing the plants. So you're using it for economics. So in business, you're selling it, or you're using it for food, or you're using it for medicine, or you're using it for recreation or leisure, or any number of things. Now, the ethnobotany is going to be in part learning about how to use it, but it's not necessarily actively using it, right? So looking at the history of lawns, looking at the history of grass, and understanding how grass has related to human cultures and how it went from a managed thing for some people to meaning turf nowadays, and understanding the history and cultural impact of lawns, lawn care, and grass and turf management. Whereas the horticulture would be learning how to manage the turf, how to make green lawns look gorgeous, and then doing that. So it would be knowing about the equipment, knowing about the fertilizing, knowing about the aeration of lawns, and understanding that a green for golfing is different than a field for soccer or football, which is different from a track for horse racing. So that's kind of the difference, right? One is doing it and using it, one is understanding the history and cultural significance behind it. And that's kind of where I got the slogan for Sunbee, which is Sunbee is the place where horticulture and human culture connect. So all of that to say, ethnobotany is a interdisciplinary field. Interdisciplinary simply means that it is going to pull information from many different fields and figure out how they connect. Ethnobotany can get information from chemistry, regular botany, economics, religion, anthropology, and that's just a few. It can draw information from any field of subjects, but I think this is a generally good few to start with, and then we can kind of see some of the different fields or different subjects that it can cover. So it can cover folklore, food, technology, medicine, textiles, business, and all of that kind of goes into arts and sciences. And so it really tries to understand the cultural significance of different things. We can start with folklore. Folklore is a pretty big one. It ties very much into the religion. It ties into, in some ways, it'll tie into the economy, the botany. So folklore, one of the stories that I really like is this story of why there's so many different cultivars and species of rice. And the very simplified story goes that rice actually only had one cultivar, one species, and this king took control of that one species, and he would control how much people got. And this goddess didn't like that and tore apart her own body to create the different types of rices. And that's why there's so many different types of rice. It was a sacrifice to ensure that no one could control the sole source of rice. That really showcases how important rice is to many different people. So that's going to be this tying of food with folklore, and in some ways it ties business. All of these things can go into one. Controlling the source of food means there are no monopolies, at least there shouldn't be, not for food. So it ties into the economy, right? It ties into, in some ways, religion, because it talks about this deity that sacrificed herself to save people. And then it can talk about the botany. It explains why there's different cultivars, and it allows us to understand how people first understood the different types of plants, right? They didn't just see that it was the same plant in different colors, but they understood that each plant was unique and interacted differently with their life and lifestyles. So that's like a really cool example. Some of the more simpler examples can be things like in Greek mythology, the gods were very, very fond of making people plants, of turning people into plants, and that is hilarious. Folklore is a really big part of it. Just to kind of signal how important folklore is, folklore existed before written language, right? And it was the first thing that allowed us to create history because we can pass down information. The next one is medicine. So with medicine, there's as many cultures as there are as many ways of practicing plant-based medicine. And that's because plant-based medicine is actually the normal medicine. That's what we've been using for thousands of years. Before we cultivated plants in agriculture and before written language, we've been using medicine and plants as medicine. And it's really incredible because that is how we've kind of grown as a species. We've grown in relationship to these plants as curative solutions. And so that's just one thing that I really want to point out, and that's kind of a mission of mine, is to get plant-based medicine more generally accepted as the normal medicine, and then modern medicine as a new and contemporary medicine. Not because we should use one or the other. We should learn how these plants have been used and learn how to cure different ailments naturally, not because it's better, but my argument is more of an economic argument. One, we can lower the cost of medicine in general. Two, we can ensure more access to medicine. So in recent years, there's been a lot of concern about the reliability about Medicare and different healthcare solutions. And I think if we just go back to what we've been using for thousands of years, we don't necessarily have to buy into the healthcare system as much. And we only need to use that for ailments that are serious problems that cannot necessarily be treated naturally. Anyways, medicine's a huge one. It ties into the botany. You have to know what plants have what chemicals, and you can kind of see that with marijuana usage. So marijuana has gotten increasingly stronger since popular usage, at least here in America. And that in part is because we've been cultivating it to be stronger and stronger. We can do that with medicinal plants. We can cultivate medicinal plants to get stronger. And then we can then utilize different cultivars and keep it from being something that's controlled by one person, such as like what we saw with the folklore of rice. That also kind of ties into business, right? So that was food. Folklore and business, medicine and business. There was this wide use of corn and different cultivars of corn. And in recent years, we've been reducing the amount of cultivars of corn that are resistant to various herbicides. And it's caused us to kind of fall into a monopoly of corn and chemicals for that corn. And that has caused many, many peoples to starve to death or not be able to feed themselves because they get into these contracts and they damage the land in such a way that they can't grow other cultivars of corn, and it's just a complete mess. And so again, learning about the previous ways that we used to live and previous cultures and even current cultures and how they utilize these different plants can allow us to live in a way that reduces our reliance on large corporations. So that kind of ties into food. One thing I want to say with food is that every area has their own unique cuisine, and we've grown plants to complement that cuisine better and better. And so if you utilize plants from a specific region, you can make a lot of different foods while reducing the cost of all of your foods, right? So, for example, right now, the American diet is has a lot of variation to it. We use rice, we use wheat, we use corn, we use all sorts of these different grains and carbs, and then we use chicken and beef and pork, and we use all sorts of vegetables that come from around the world or around at least from different parts of the US, and slowly drives up cost because of variety. And one thing that we can do to like reduce that is by learning about the different cuisines that different regions have, and then purchasing plants and vegetables and meats that are used very widely within that group of cuisine. If you purchase foods from this cuisine area or this group of cuisine, you can use those foods in different ways to make different meals. So you still have some variety, but you have less waste, right? Because if you purchase, let's say you purchase tomato paste for one meal and you have half a can, and then you have like 8 tomatoes when you only needed 6. And so today you're making a casserole, but the next day you're making burgers, and then the next day you're making pasta. It's like at some point you're gonna have wasted food. And you can reduce that if you make foods from the same cuisine type, because then you can reuse that, or you can use the leftover ingredients for the next meal. And it's really cool because one, you learn how to cook a little bit easier because you're learning similar cooking techniques, but also you're using similar ingredients to each thing, so you have less food waste. And because you're getting better at cooking, it tastes better, right? Like if you have all of the foods that's been like cultivated together for the last 10,000 years, it's gonna taste pretty good, right? Anyways, that's another like opinion thing, but it's really cool because the food is also not just ingrained in our species as a way to survive, but also as a way to connect with people. If you see someone eating something that's a traditional food in your culture, you instantly feel connected to that person, because that either means that person has traveled to that country, that person has met people and have become close friends with the people from that country, or that person has done research and learned about this food and has an appreciation for that. And so now you can have this connection with someone. It also kind of represents in-groupness, right? Because if you and I are eating the same thing, it probably means that we're part of the same group. And it instantly builds this cohesion and this network, this community. Not only that, but eating together is super important. And so, yeah, it's really cool that food has all of these different ties to it. Textiles is interesting. So a lot of textiles have been plant-based for thousands of years. And it's really cool because cotton is the most widely used plant fiber for textiles in the world. And it's not even just worldwide. You can look at it for each country. And things like France. France has produced the most amount of linen and exported the most amount of linen in the world. And so it's not just for textiles, which ties into art, but it also ties into the business, it ties into the technology. Technology is interesting because the types of plant that you have actually affects the type of technologies you can create. If you can imagine a place that only has softwoods, won't be able to develop a mallet. And so the way they interact and utilize their resources will be a little bit different than a place that's able to create mallets. Bamboo, bendy, and it's naturally hollow inside. And so that lends itself to being used differently than oak trees, which are very strong and difficult to cut down, but once you harvest the wood, can be used for many, many different things. And so it's really cool that these plants actually do affect our technologies. And then depending on what plant you have in the region, can affect whether you can create different types of strings or ropes. It'll affect whether you can create bows and arrows, or if you have to create slings. It affects whether you can make pole arms, or if you have to simply use them for club. Fruit trees, or if you have to be a more bush, fruiting bush-based society. Like it's just really interesting. And so technology ties into like warfare, but it also ties into building. So using straw in adobo, or using lumber posts in a cob house. It's just really interesting that the types of plants that you have influences the type of technology a civilization makes. Then it's business, and we've kind of tied all of this to business in some way. That's like a common through line in all human civilization, is that there is business, and whether it's like selling food, or if it's building buildings, or if it's creating clothing, or any number of stuff, it's tied to business in some way. So ethnobotany really does look at how humans and plants have interacted for thousands of years, and it's really, really cool. And so I'm really appreciative that y'all joined me on this video, and I hope y'all watch more videos, and I really would love for y'all to share your experiences and your stories relating to plants. Whether it's your story of like moving to a new place and not being able to eat the food that you were used to, but then meeting someone that can cook the food that you miss growing up, right? Or you building your house, building it, your first house or your second or whatever it is, but being a part of the building and learning that this wood can be used for that, this wood can be used for that. This is what I would recommend, right? We use cedar here and we use pine here, but you have to use this type of pine or this grade of pine or whatever it may be. Or maybe it's folklore. Maybe you have a personal story that your grandma or your mom or your dad told you that has connected with you for the last 10, 20, 30 years. I would love to hear your stories, whether you're in the business of plants or you are just someone who loves and appreciates it. I want to hear it. So comment it, or make a YouTube short, or make a YouTube video. Either way, I would like to just get more stories about plants out there, and for more people to grow a little bit more of an appreciation. Maybe not as much of a love as I have for plants, but at least a little bit of an appreciation for plants. They're amazing, and so are y'all. So if you like the video, subscribe, and if you feel inclined, support us in some way, and I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Thank you for watching, and remember, Sunbee is where horticulture and human culture connect.